Hey friends, it's Davey Blackburn here, and I'm so excited to let you know about something that many of you in our Nothing is Wasted community have been waiting for a long time. After more than 7 years, we are officially launching my book, Nothing is Wasted, a true story of hope, forgiveness, and finding purpose in pain. For many of you, you've followed along with my story, you've been a part of Amanda's legacy, and I'm so excited to share with you more about her life and the impact she has left on me and on this ministry. Now, you've heard parts of the story throughout our time together, but nothing to this depth or quite with this level of insight that comes from looking back on your greatest pain. This book is deeply personal, and it will give you a new perspective on your own pain to purpose journey. And ultimately, I think you'll learn that in whatever we face, whatever trauma, tragedy, or major life transition, absolutely nothing is wasted. I can't wait for you to get this book in your hands on July 30th of this year. That's right, July 30th, 2024. And I'd love for you to be a part of sharing Amanda's story and legacy with the world. So keep an eye out on how you can play a special role in doing just that. I'm so grateful for you for being a part of all that we do at Nothing is Wasted. And I know that this story, my story, Amanda's story, is pointing us all to a much bigger story of hope and redemption. And that is something we all need right now.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I am one of your hosts, Aubrey Sampson. The other voice that you're used to hearing over these headphones, over the airwaves, is Davey Blackburn, and he could not be here today. But I am so thrilled to be with you. We have another incredible conversation today with Kyle Idleman. You might know that name, you might not know that name, but Kyle Idleman is a best-selling author. He is the senior pastor of, get this, one of the largest churches in America. So no pressure on him at all. That's Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And you might know him. He has an award-winning book that came out several years ago called Not a Fan. It sold over 1 million copies and really sparked a movement among believers. He's authored many other books, One at a Time, The End of Me, Grace is Greater, Don't Give Up. He and his wife have 4 kids, and they live on a farm, but this is funny. He always says, I live on a farm and do no farming. But he's another book out called When Your Way Isn't Working, Finding Purpose and Contentment Through Deep Connection with Jesus. And really, it's a book about when our ways aren't working, like the things we're trying to do or the things we stop doing are leading us to, not a fruitful life, not an abundant life, but a brittle life and a dry life, maybe a spiritually empty season, or one where we're just making decisions that we know aren't in alignment with the things of God. And so you are going to love Davey's conversation with Kyle, where he talks about his own season very vulnerably, where even as a pastor, he let go of some of the rhythms he was supposed to be doing. And at some point realized I'm not abiding in Christ. And I know that's something all of our listeners can relate to. We all go through seasons like that, certainly as Christians. But I think the reality check for us is when we allow that almost as an excuse, like we go, oh, this is a season, it's fine. And Kyle's here to say, hey, there are some things we need to do if we catch ourselves in seasons like that to begin being filled up with the Spirit of God and the presence of God, so that what pours out of us is from God, from abundance and from goodness. So once again, I know you're going to love Davey's conversation with Kyle Idleman. Before we go there, I want to invite you to do a couple things. One, if you're looking for your next step here at Nothing is Wasted, we're not only a podcast is one of the doors of entry, but we're a ministry. We've got coaching, we've got content, we've got community, we've got some beautiful things for you. And we'd love to invite you to just take a first step by joining us for a free live call. That's with Davey, called 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story. And you can sign up for that by going to nothingiswasted.com/start here. While you're there, we'd love you to also go to nothingiswastedbook.com. That's nothingiswastedbook.com. The Nothing is Wasted book is releasing here at the end of July, just a few more months. We are all celebrating, all excited about it. We'd love to have you join the launch team. We'd love to have you help spread the word. We'd love to even invite you to the live book launch event that's going to be happening this summer in Indianapolis. So to find out all of those details, again, that's nothingiswastedbook.com. All right, let's go ahead and take a listen to Davey's conversation with Kyle Idleman.
Well, Kyle, man, it's so great to have you on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Davey, it's good to be with you, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Well, man, I know there's so many of our folks who are going to know of you, or maybe just be familiar with your work. I mean, I know Not a Fan was such a preeminent book. I mean, it's one of so many of our if you're in church world, if you're around believers at all, you're going to probably be familiar with Not a Fan. And so, but maybe if you're listening to this, you're watching this on YouTube, you don't know that Kyle Idleman is the man behind Not a Fan, and so we're just grateful to have you on. But for those of us who don't know you or what you do or your background, your family, why don't you just share a little bit about who you are right now, and then we're going to dive into this new book that you just released.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a small town in Missouri called Joplin, Missouri. My dad was a seminary president. And so I did not want to be in ministry. He was awesome and set a great example, all of that. But I just was like, yeah, it's not for me. And
that's most of us PKs. That's kind of our route. Like,
man. Yeah. I think it's like an invitation to God. Like when he hears like that, he's like, oh, really? Really? Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see. And yet, I grew up learning to love people and love the church and love Jesus. And so, that's what filled my heart as I got older, and then God gave me different opportunities, and I feel like He kind of tricked me into it, but I loved it, and so my wife and I went to Los Angeles County to start a new church in 1999, 98, 99, and we were there for 4 or 5 years and loved church planting. It was so good. For me, I grew tremendously. I had no idea what I was doing, and God was super gracious. But He put some good people around us that helped us and walked with us, and we got to experience just some of the, I know that you have been in the seat where you get to experience the front row life change of watching God redeem and just, being able to walk with people in that. It was incredible. It made us fall in love even deeper with the local church, but I tell you, man, I was like 24, 25, and just there's a lot I needed to learn, and I started to recognize that even as a husband and as a father, I was probably not on a path that was going to be. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back on it, I was not on a great path of balance. It was planting a church with a young family, as can be pretty all-consuming, and if you don't know how to put the right boundaries in, and so I came to Louisville, Kentucky, as a teaching pastor here in 2002, 2003. It's been 20 years ago now, and had some incredible men that really helped model the way for me, really helped sharpen me as a husband and father and as a follower of Jesus and as a leader. And I didn't realize how much I needed that until I was getting it. Suddenly I'm like, that's how you do that. And that's the healthy way to approach that. And this is how, I learned so much. And I fell in love with this church. I've been at this church, like I said, for 20 years, was teaching pastor for a long time, then became the senior pastor in, it was right before COVID, like 2019. And so it's been great. We've got 4 kids. Our oldest 2 daughters are married, and we love our son-in-laws, which, look, if you would have told me when I was a dad with young daughters that I would love my son-in-laws, I'd be like, no way, bro. Like, that is not going to happen. But we really love our sons-in-law, and we have 1 grandson and 2 grandkids on the way. So that's pretty sweet. Yeah,
well, that's encouraging because my daughter's 10.
Yeah, you can't
right
imagine
now,
it.
I'm
Can
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah.
That's so funny. She said something.
It's been a great surprise to know that that's possible, that you can really love your sons-in-law. So
Kyle, this is total aside, but I just can't help but chuckle about this. We went to Whole Foods yesterday, and after I picked them up from school, and she just was in this like blissful, I don't know, like some creative artistic mood for whatever, very romantic, and she just goes, sometimes I want to grow up and sometimes I don't want to, but I want to grow up sometimes because I just want to feel what a real kiss feels like. And I was like, excuse me?
Great. That's great. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Do you take
crazy.
that one in stride?
I just it took me aback for a second. I have to start preparing myself for those now because I didn't really take. I was like, hold on.
So sweet, bro. It's so sweet. Yeah. I
It's
have
just so
three
funny.
girls and a boy, and yeah, my youngest is my son. But yeah, man, I loved raising daughters
Man.
and my son. But yeah, they're so sweet.
That's awesome. Well, man, you've been a pastor for a while now, and of course, you already alluded to this idea of, as you start pastoring, all of us, right, especially in church planting, we think we know what we're doing, we have no idea what we're doing. But specifically as pastors, a lot of times you get into it because you have such a deep love and connection for Jesus, and you want other people to share that, right? But then you get into the rigmarole of, building church and the systems and the processes and all that kind of stuff, and you begin to lose some of that connection or that sense of connection in an effort
Yeah.
to help other people. And that's, in some ways, that's kind of what this book is about. Just driving back to the deep connection that you have with the Lord. I would love, first of all, just to kind of hear, because we talk about, as we're working with pastors and church ministry leaders especially, we see that things can go awry and trauma, pain, suffering, or avoidable pain and suffering can happen when you begin to see this incongruency between your inner man or woman and then the outward presentation that you're giving. What were some of the things that caused you to have kind of an alarm system go off and go, wait a minute, I've got to really inspect these things. I've got to drive back to this connect. What was the first indicator for you that okay, something's awry here?
Yeah, I would say a few things here. I would say first, I learned through church planting pretty early on the reality of my weakness and need for dependence. So for me, down the road, it wasn't that I didn't understand how dependent I am on Jesus, on his strength, on his provision. I did understand that. And had learned that, and some of that the hard way. But I got into a season as a senior pastor where I used the word distracted, but I thought it was seasonal distraction, meaning that, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, whether they're in ministry or not, where you think to yourself, hey, this is just a season, right? Like, I know that some of my practices aren't very consistent right now. I know that some of my disciplines aren't very evident right now, but it's just a season, and it's not going to be that way for very long. And when this is over, and when I get through this year, then I'll get back to some of those things. And then before you know it, you're not just a few weeks into it, you're a few months into it or a year into it, and then inevitably you start to see what surfaces, right? Like, it's not sustainable. And so for me, some of that came because I was transitioning into the role of senior pastor, and it was a different position, and I told myself, hey, for the next year, I'm going to push pretty hard on some things. I'll get my arms around some stuff, and then it'll level out. But about the time I thought it was going to level out, COVID hit, and then I thought, okay, well, look, this is only going to last a few weeks, few months. We'll push really hard, but then the few months became a couple of years, and so, without realizing it, you find yourself in like this 2-3 year rhythm that always, catches up to you. If not emotionally and spiritually, it'll catch up to you physically. Like, that's one of the things I try to underline with folks when I talk to them about this, is like, I wouldn't say I've had very many seasons where I've felt like depressed or overly anxious or whatever, but physically, my body started to just not hang in there, and I was not honoring these rhythms, biblical rhythms of rest and replenishment, and it was, in hindsight, I'd listened to plenty of podcasts and read plenty of books. It was not an information problem. It wasn't even an application problem. It was this. I'll do it a little bit later when things calm down or when things level out, and that's sort of the way I found. But to answer your question, like, for me, there were a few things that warning signs or kind of on the dashboard, some things that started to flash at me, one of those was just hearing from my wife say, "Hey, you've not been yourself lately." She would say things like, "Hey, I remember this conversation we had where she said, 'Hey, one of my favorite things about you is that you never get offended. You're just never offended.'" And she said, "Lately, I feel like you're getting offended, more easily." And I'm like, "What's that supposed to mean?" Right? Like, I'm getting offended at the comment. And but some of those things. And then I had a buddy of mine who's not in ministry or anything. We're just friends. He said, "Hey, I've got this executive coach. I think you should talk to him." And at the time, I thought, well, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Some of the leadership challenges, and then I make an appointment with this executive coach that he recommended, and I get 30 minutes into the phone call, and I'm like, "Yeah, you're a therapist. You call yourself an executive coach, so people like me will call and make an appointment, but you're a therapist." And so I think having some people around you that are close enough to say, "Hey, you've not been yourself lately, and here's some things that concern me." And then I had a few leaders at church, the same thing, where they're like, you've just not been yourself. And so I think making sure that you have people around you, like, to me, this is how it's supposed to work, right? Like, I look back and I'm encouraged by the fact that, that's how it's supposed to happen. Like, what gets people in trouble is when they should have some of that, because it's inevitable you're going to need it. Right. They should have some of that, and there's nobody there that feels like they can or has permission to. And so I'm thankful that was, I had some people around me like that.
Wow. Pull the thread on that a little bit, because, the book is titled "When Your Way Isn't Working." And inevitably, I'm sure you found, as you were getting some insight and some feedback from some of these close people in your life, that you started seeing some things about your way that wasn't working, right? And so what were some of those things, like, as you begin to pull the thread and untangle some of this stuff, where you go, okay, I recognize some things right here that were whatever, unhealthy, or that were contributing to this kind of deviation from who I really am, or what people have known me to be.
Yeah. Well, I take a lot of this conversation out of John 15, where Jesus, on the evening that he would be arrested in the garden, where he's walking with his disciples after having, the Last Supper there. They're walking on the streets outside of Jerusalem towards the Garden of Gethsemane, and he sees these vines and branches sprawled out along the road there outside Jerusalem, and he says to his disciples, "I'm the vine and you're the branches. If you remain in me and I remain in you, you'll bear much fruit, but apart from me, you can't do anything." And he knows he has very little time left. He knows he's getting ready to leave them with this mission, that's huge. And what he underlines for them, like the one thing he doesn't want them to forget, is remain, abide, stay connected. And if you do that, you'll bear much fruit. But if you don't do that, it's not going to work. And so, for me, it was this recognition that everything needs to reflect abiding. Like, for whether it's as a father, a husband, as a pastor, it all needs to come out of abiding. If I want to bear fruit in these areas of my life, I can't will it on my own. I can't best practice that stuff on my own. Like, that's got to be, if it's going to be sustainable and if it's going to be true, it's got to come out of a real abiding connection. And so as I reflected on that, I just began to see, that, certain things that I had done in the past to keep that connection, I needed to go back to. Honestly, it was that, some of it was that simple. Like, for example, giving God my mornings. I when my kids were a little bit younger, I was in a pretty good habit of that, just because we had so much routine that was required. And they got a little bit older, less routine required, later nights. more responsibilities in the morning. And for me, the practice of giving God my mornings as a husband, father, pastor, it can't be overstated. I think it's huge. And some people say, well, maybe that's not as true for others, and maybe give God your evenings or whatever. I don't know. I'd kind of argue that the mornings are sacred.
Can you
I think there's
touch on
something
that just a little bit more too? Because I'm of the same persuasion, right? Like, and as a pastor, I would try to tell people, like, man, just give the Lord your morning, right? 10 minutes a day, every day, going to change the rest of your days, right there, first thing, first private, right? But a lot of people will be like, well, I'm not a morning person, or there are a lot of pushbacks, a lot of objections. I mean, just for a second, I mean, like, what would be your side of the argument there, so to speak? Why would you persuade us why mornings need to be the space that we give the Lord there?
So there's this narrative in Mark chapter 1 that where the verse that gets pulled out a lot is where it just says Jesus went off early in the morning by himself to a quiet place to pray. But what is really fascinating about that story is what happens after that. So he's in this town. Everyone's coming to him with expectations. Like, that's what it says in the text. Like, that they had all come to the house. Where's Jesus? They were expecting him, had these expectations of him. And he comes back from his early morning time with God, and he says to the disciples, who are all like, hey, there's all these people here. We've got your day planned for you. Here's all these needs that need to be met. Here's all the expectations that you need to, that are on us. And Jesus is like, no, I think we're going to go to the next town, actually, and I'm going to preach there. And he just leaves all these people who are waiting at the house with their expectations, and goes to and changes the plan that everyone else had for him of that day, because I believe he spent time with God and he knew what that day needed to look like. Yeah. Had he not done that, then I think he would have woke up, the disciples would have been like, hey, there's a lot of people here. He would have jumped in, got started teaching, and healing and doing everything that Jesus did. But because he took time, it put him on a different path than everyone else thought he should take. Mm-hmm. And I just would challenge people with this idea that when we don't take that time with God in the mornings, we become really vulnerable to other people's expectations and definitions of what our day should look like, what success should look like, what conversations we should have. That gets determined for us pretty quickly by the pressures and responsibilities that are right in front of us. Yeah. And so for Jesus to set that example, and then for that to change the course of his day, even though, look, he disappointed a lot of people that day, right? Like, without question, that would have been frustrating to the disciples and disappointing to the people. And yet he knew from his time with God that it should look different. And so when I see that as his example, and I know how often my days can be where I look back at the end of the day and I'm like, I didn't get to have this conversation with maybe one of my kids that I know I needed to have, and I missed out on an opportunity, here because I was busy with. I look back and I recognize how much of it ends up getting determined for me rather than being sensitive to what God wants or being aware of his leading. And so for me, that's important. The other thing I would say is that in the mornings, you set the tone for gratitude. I think that's reflected in the Psalms. Like, you can look back on the day and be thankful, and you should be, but I think what sets that up is starting off the day that way, because, you are looking at your schedule and you're being time to be grateful, thankful, I can tell you that if I start the day praying for my wife and expressing gratitude to God for who she is, it's going to change the rest of my day with her. And the same is true with the people I work with and I'm around. If I can begin the day with gratitude for those people and what they do and how they encourage me and how they, it just changes the course of it. So I think in the mornings, starting the day with gratitude and thanksgiving in prayer and connection, I think that sets the tone. It gives you eyes to see that the rest of the day.
That's great. That's wonderful. So before I took you down that rabbit trail, you were talking about some of those things, and one of those things that was working in the past, and now you had deviated from it, and now your way of life wasn't working because you had kind of compromised those mornings. What were some other things that maybe you saw were like, okay, this way is not working. I need to check into these things.
I would say, getting kind of caught up in the people I needed to take care of, and not being intentional to take care of myself, whether that was physically or spiritually or emotionally, making sure that I am caring for others out of an overflow of love others as you love yourself, right? And I was reading some research from Dr. Townsend on this, and one of the things he talks about that I found really fascinating is that the more of a source, he calls it source person, the more of a source person you become, this isn't a direct quote, but the less likely you are to have a source person in your life. Meaning that the more you're in a position where others come to you for help, that statistically you're less likely to have someone that you go to for help.
Wow.
And when I was reading through that, I just resonated with it. Like the more I have found myself in a position where I am a helper, a rescuer for people, the less likely I am to have somebody that is, that I go to and say, I need help. And I don't, at first I would think, oh, that's pride, right? Like the more you get into this position where people ask you for help, the less you go to someone for help. And I think pride's part of it. But I also think that you just intuitively start to feel like you can't do that. Like, okay, it would be like, let me see if I can come up with an example of this real quick. It would be like if you're a fireman, and I haven't thought this through, so if it breaks down.
That's all right.
But if you're a fireman and somebody in the neighborhood's house, it catches on fire, they're going to come to you, you go help them put out the fire, whatever, bring your fireman friends. But if your house is on fire, then it doesn't, like, why would you go to somebody else to ask them, like, hey, my house is on fire? You're a fireman.
Right.
And I don't know that's, I think some of that's pride, but I don't think it's all pride. Like, I think part of that is just this, like, I know what nobody's going to tell me something I don't already know. I know what the answer is. Like, cognitively, I understand what needs to happen. And I do think, if it's humbling. If you're a fireman asking somebody else to help you put out a fire, that's a humbling thing. You're like, well, aren't you a fireman? But it's such a biblical thing. Like, so one of the verses that really became important to me is Galatians 6:2, where it says, bear one another's burdens, and in doing so, you fulfill the law of Christ. And what I began to recognize, and it was a little embarrassing to take this long in life to figure this out, but what I began to recognize is going to somebody for help. I could do that if I could see clearly that they could offer me something I didn't have to help me.
Yeah.
But just going to someone and saying, hey, this is a burden I have. I know you can't fix it. I know there's nothing you can do about it. I'm just sharing it with you. I would have been like, why would you do that? Like, why would you share that with somebody if they can't do anything? And I have learned that just the practice of bearing burdens with one another, just doing, even if they can't do anything, or even if they're not in a position to do anything, just that practice is incredibly helpful. Like just sharing the weight of that is really, really helpful.
Wow. That's so good. I love the distinction between that, because you're right. Like, especially as a pastor, as you're accustomed to helping other people, or like a counselor, for instance, right? A counselor is so great, or a therapist so great at like knowing how to walk somebody through a particular situation or through healing. But when something happens in their own life where they're feeling that applied pressure, or they go through some kind of traumatic event, it's nearly impossible to apply that same stuff to yourself.
Yes.
We all need, it's like, I know what I need to do, but And I'm sure that that's part of the way that God has designed all of this for us to be able to exhort each other and walk through life together. And so I love that.
One of the things I was researching for this book, I went out to a vineyard because Jesus says, "I'm the vine, you're the branches." I went out to a vineyard. I was talking to like a guy who does that. And I forget the technical term of the vineyard owner, but but he was talking about how part of the job is he'll walk these lines, and if he sees a branch that's in the dirt, as long as it's connected to the vine, then it's fine. He'll clean it off, and then he'll wrap it up in what is essentially like this lattice work, right, so that it comes out of the dirt. But the way that was done, and the way that's done in nature, is that the branches intertwine with each other, and so a branch by itself is just going to be in the dirt. Like it's not going to be able to fulfill its purpose. Yeah. The only way that branch bears fruit and fulfills its purpose is by intertwining with other branches. And that's why Jesus says, I'm the vine. He doesn't say I'm the vine and you're the branch. He says I'm the vine and you're the branches. It is the togetherness that allows us to experience that growth and that purpose in our lives. And so I think for some of us, personality-wise, you know this better than I do. Like if you're helping people who are going through some pain and some difficulty, for some of us, we intuitively just don't want to be around other people. Yeah. Like because when we're hurting, we're just like, I just want to be left alone, right? And that might feel like the right thing, but it doesn't work. Like you have to have other people bearing those burdens, intertwining with other branches, and otherwise you just kind of stay in the dirt. And so recognizing like I need other people to do this with. I need other people that I can share this with, and if I'm gonna bear the fruit that God wants me to bear out of pain or out of whatever I'm going through, I can't do that alone. It's got to be with other people.
Yeah, it's so good. So good. Kyle, I was telling you off air about the course that we have, Pain to Purpose, and it's interesting that you mentioned some of these rhythms that you were going back to, kind of driving back to the simplicity of following Jesus, getting connected to the vine, and that's part of the course that when we talk about is spiritual rhythms and physical rhythms that will, and this is what we say. We say that will help you in your healing, because a lot of times when crisis hits your life, that can be an alert to us to like, okay, I need to drive back to the basics of just getting connected with Jesus. Ultimately, it's connection with Jesus that's going to be, he's the physician. He's going to really be the one that heals us. But also what it does is it puts a strong foundation or resecures or rebuilds a foundation in your life to get you ready for the next crisis or trial that's going to come in your life. And my question to you with that being said is how important is you're working with people, as you're helping people, how much do you guys emphasize this? Okay, to building this foundation, building this connectivity before, right? Training for the trial that you're not yet in. Yeah. And why is that so important for us?
Hi, friend. One of the questions we get asked most frequently here at Nothing is Wasted is, how do I help my friend who has just experienced a trauma, tragedy, or major life transition? We know there are so many of you who listen to our podcast and who follow the work we do because you want to help those you love as they walk through a difficult season. We love the compassionate hearts of those within the Nothing is Wasted community and appreciate your desire to help bring healing and hope to the many and to the one, which is why I wanted to share with you a resource that we have called When Everything Changes, Navigating the Early Days of Loss, Trauma, and Tragedy. In this 4-session mini course, participants will hear from me, as well as Davey Blackburn, our founder, and also the podcast co-host, Aubrey Sampson. Aubrey is also the author of The Louder Song, a best-selling book on lament. I'll share with you practical ways to walk them through whatever valleys they found themselves in recently. We know our Pain to Purpose course is such a helpful and proven pathway for those who have had a little time to process their pain, but we wanted to also have something for those who are in the immediate aftermath of their lives changing forever. This is a great resource that you can purchase and share with your friend who has found themselves in a story very different from what they expected. In each session, they will get practical wisdom on what to expect in those early days, how to lament, and what support they need as they go through this marathon of healing. If you'd like to send this to a hurting friend, simply go to nothingiswasted.com/everythingchanges and select the course When Everything Changes gift option. We are so grateful for compassionate individuals like you who are willing to step into the pain of those they love and walk them through it. And we hope you'll find resources like this course and this podcast to be the tools you need to help those who are struggling when everything changes.
Man, it's such a good insight. So, you see this all the time as a pastor, right? Somebody experiences a significant tragedy in their life. If they're already connected to a group, if they're already connected to other believers, if they're kind of doing life with folks already, and then that happens, it is completely different than someone who doesn't have all of that and something happens and now they're on their own. Now, we will do everything we can to come to the person who's on their own and help them find that in the middle of it, and honored to do that. And I couldn't even tell you the percentage of people who come to church because that's the position they're in. Right. Like something really hard has happened and they're going through it and they've been by themselves, but now they need community. So, to anyone listening who finds themselves in that position, it's not too late. Like you can find that in the middle of it, but it's so much better if you are doing that intentionally and proactively. And here's the thing, like the inevitability that's going to be the position you're in is certain. Like that is going to be true. My dad used to do this thing that seemed at the time a little, I don't know, sadistic, I guess, is when we were younger, like teenage years, we'd go to like a funeral or something of a friend or something difficult, or we'd hear about, someone going through something really tough. And when we would process that as a family, one of the things he would say to us is he'd say, our time's coming. And I'd be like, man, that is not really what you want to hear. Yeah. But he, what he wanted to help us understand as teenagers, I mean, that's age appropriate, right? You probably don't want to tell your 5-year-old that. But he wanted us to understand this is we're going to experience really difficult things in life. And if we wait until that happens to get connected to Jesus and be connected to other people, man, it's going to be a lot harder. So, let's not be naive. Let's be intentional now so that we can have that strength and have that dependence, when we go through it. And as you know, there's just nothing quite like being a pastor to see how real that is. Like when, so.
That's man, absolutely. You break this book down into kind of two parts, and it's one of is diagnosing when you find yourself in a space or you start to feel like you're disconnected, diagnosing some of that disconnection, and then you identify these 4 areas that become part of that diagnosis process: discouragement, frustration, fatigue, anxiety. Can you, obviously, people need to pick up the book and read it in depth to be able to get all of it, but can you give us a little bit of a flyover from each of these 4 things and kind of what they're indicating in our life? Like, what do we do? Why are they distinct? What do we do about them?
Yeah. I like to think of these things as, these warning lights. And I think it's important, as we talk through them, like, you're going to feel these to some degree on any given day. What should really get your attention is when when 3 or 4 of these are consistently true for you, and you find yourself, weeks go by, months go by, and that's your reality. Like that should really get your attention. So one of the things I talk about there is discouragement, and that's a word that gets used a lot. So I like to talk about that as living with a lack of courage, where you are kind of just going through the motions and doing what you need to do, but not with much passion or purpose, and not really having any energy to take risks or to step out. You're just kind of getting by. And when you're living with a consistent lack of courage, it affects you, but it really affects the people around you, because they learn that they can't really depend on you. Like they learn that your emotional tank doesn't have much in it, and just leave Dad alone. He's on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He's tired. You're not strong enough for the people around you to lean on you when they need you, right? And so you start to notice like that your people aren't coming to you with their stuff, because they can tell, like they can just tell there's a lack of courage there. And I think when you're kind of in that state for a while of discouragement, it really affects you, but it affects everyone around you. I think that often leads to fatigue, where you're just tired and you don't know why. For me, that was part of it. I wouldn't have said, "Oh, I feel discouraged," but I felt tired, and I went to my doctor and said, "Hey, give me something. There must be something wrong." And he ran all the blood tests and did everything, and he's like, "No, I think all your stuff comes back good. You're fine." He said, "I just think you need to rest. I think you're just tired." And I was sure he was wrong. I was like, I think that's not it. I mean, there's got to be some medicine you can give me or whatever. And so I think when you just kind of feel this fatigue, and suddenly, to me, the way that surfaces is suddenly even the things that are basic responsibilities become what's a good example of this? Like paying the bills. Like that just feels so tiring. Like I've got to, so I'm not, I'll do that tomorrow. Stuff are just little things like taking out the trash where you're like, now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not just like,
yes.
I don't feel like doing that right now, but like overwhelming. Like I can't even think about doing that right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just don't have any space for it to even think about doing that. And that, that doesn't take long at all for things to kind of catch up to you when you start doing that. And then the one for me that was probably got my attention the most, I alluded to it earlier, but was the frustration where my wife said, you don't ever get offended, and lately I feel like you're more easily offended. And when you find yourself just being irritable with people and with life, and you don't really know why, like that's just where you're at. To me, that's for me, that was a pretty significant red flag, partly because that had never been something I had dealt with or struggled with, and now suddenly, people are annoying me. And at some point you go like, maybe it's not them, right? Like maybe it's me. And so I think, I think that general sense of irritability or annoyance with people, what's tough about that is the people around you need to be able to tell you that. And if you're in a situation or in a season where you're easily offended, they're not likely to, because they don't want to offend you, right? So, or they don't want to upset you, or they don't want to hurt you, so they don't say anything. And so the very people who are in the most clear position to see it are often the most timid about it, because they don't know how you'll react or respond. Let me come back to that in a minute. I'll hit the last one. Let's see, fatigue, frustration,
anxiety.
Discouragement, anxiety. Yeah. So I always had in my mind these ideas of what anxiety looked like, and thought, it's not really something that I feel emotionally. But for me, it became here's how I began to define it for myself, is trying to control things that I had no control over. Not being able to accept, like you've got no control over, whatever it is. I could give you examples in my family or at church, but an unwillingness to accept that and think, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to control this, and recognizing that is a spirit of anxiety. And so for, when those 4 things start to flash on the dashboard, I think learning to self-diagnose that. One of the things I did, which I would really encourage people to do, do it prayerfully and don't rush into this. But I asked about 10 people in my life just to tell me 3 things they see in me that are concerning to them. And I really pushed on this. I said, look, I don't want you to. If you asked me to do this for you, I'd say, oh, bro, you're good. Like, here's a few things I think you're doing great. And yeah, here's a couple things you could work on. But I would want to be really supportive and encourage. I told the folks who did this for me, I'm not looking for that. I want you to tell me what are 3 things that you think I need to hear. And, I know you've got them, so tell them to me. And I collected those and spent quite a bit of time reading through them, and some of the people really were very lengthy, and they they didn't just do 3, right? Like they and I found so much freedom in it, man. I found so much freedom because I recognized, hey, these people all love me, and they know these things that I already knew about myself. I just didn't want to say and thought maybe other people didn't know. Oh, they knew. Like, they already knew it. And so I found a lot of freedom to kind of be honest about those things with myself and kind of recognize that it's okay. Like, see it and, be honest about it. But it was really helpful to me to see that like those lights on the dashboard, having other people point them out to you is really powerful. What's people who love you.
What's so cool about that is getting that feedback from people. But the temptation would be, I'm sure, especially as someone who, admittedly is a fixer or want to control certain things, you start to treat the symptom or the thing that's evident that people are calling out. And what you're saying in all of this, though, is the real answer is driving back to the root of connectedness to resolve this.
Yeah.
Hey, Nothing is Wasted family. Are you walking through a specific valley, looking for resources to help you in your pain? I think we can all attest to the fact that there is comfort in hearing from those who have walked a similar path and have found hope and healing on the other side. That is why we have created collections of resources called Curated Pathways to help you navigate your specific pain point. With curated pathways on topics like grief, child loss, sexual betrayal, childhood trauma, widowhood, and more, we've compiled the very best resources from Nothing is Wasted all in one place that will speak directly to what you are experiencing right now. Our curated pathways will give you access to everything we've created, from past podcast episodes to bonus content and our masterclasses, live coaching, and everything in between. When you're facing a crisis, loss, or trauma, you don't have the time or energy to search for what could help you heal. You can get a taste of what our curated pathways have to offer by going to nothingiswasted.com/pathways. But if you're ready to go to the next level on your healing journey, you can access the full library of our resources, including the entire curated pathway you're looking for, by becoming a Community Plus member. For just $20 a month or $200 a year, you'll have access to the complete collection of Nothing is Wasted's curated pathways. As a Community Plus member, you'll be able to access a new curated pathway each month as our collection grows. Our team has been working very hard on this to catalog, index, organize, and distribute our library of content in a way that will be most helpful to you. We know what it is like to face pain, and we want to equip you with the tools you need to find hope and healing as you move from pain to purpose. Join Community Plus today at nothingiswasted.com/Community Plus and partner with God to take back your story.
Yes. Yeah. And that's such a good insight. So, the tendency I would have, and I think a lot of people would have, is to address those things, to fix those things by, okay, here's my plan. I'm going to read this book, and I'm going to come up with these best practices on how to become, how to have less anxiety or how to be less offended or whatever. And all those things have a place. Like, it's not that is bad. but it must come from abiding. Like it must start with connection. And the picture that I think is helpful is like this idea of like if you're buttoning a shirt, if you get the top button right, then all the other buttons kind of start getting aligned. But if you don't get the top button right, then all the other ones are going to be off. And it doesn't make any sense to like start in the middle or start at the bottom. You want to start with the top one. You get that one right, and the others have a way of lining up. And I think that's really true with abiding in Christ and connecting to Jesus. Like if I focus my energy on that and I get that top button right, these others require work and effort. Like there are other things that I need to address and practices and disciplines I need to put into place. But man, it gets a lot easier when that alignment is established. And so connecting to the vine, finding that abiding in Christ, the rest of it lines up without near as much effort. Effort may not be the right word, but because it does take effort, but it does it more naturally.
Yeah, it becomes fruit from that abiding, right? And that's the
that's right.
What a
it becomes
beautiful
fruit.
illustration.
That's a good way to say it.
The top button that's an incredible illustration. I love that. It's like it just becomes, it starts producing this, and it may not be overnight, but it's over some time. You begin to see, I'm connected to the vine again. I'm abiding, and now I'm starting to see my attitudes change. My words with others are changing. My outlook on life. I'm being filled with courage and faith and hope. And what a great thing. Okay, so I'd love for you to, as we kind of close, we do have a lot of ministry leaders and pastors who also listen to this. Majority of people are just folks who are in the church, lay people who are, going through life, and they're going through some difficult things. But there are quite a few who are going, okay, I want to help people as they're going through difficult things. And I might have my own things I'm going through as well. But there's I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, two almost different types of ministry leaders. The ones who kind of have the stiff upper lip, and they're like, okay, we're gonna, I'm gonna just keep helping people, and they ignore some of these symptoms that are surfacing or coming up, or they're not sure how to decipher or diagnose those. And they're almost digging their heels in to ignore them. It's like, that especially like your ministry leaders who are like, I'm just going to keep taking the hill. I know you've come across folks like that. I know you've felt that same probably kind of pull in your own life. What would you say to that person first? And then I'll ask you the follow-up question.
Well, I think what I would say to that person is it works for a while, but it catches up to you. And one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, and one of the reasons I'd want to share this with you, is I think the way people in that position become more aware is when others who have tried it that way say, oh man, that did work for me for a while. It worked for me until it didn't. And so, when I see someone in that role or in that position, I would try to, warn them with compassion in that way, like, hey, this is going to catch up to you. And yet I also, I don't want to be fatalistic about it, but I also know that person, the reality is that some things probably are going to have to drop before they will humble themselves and say, this isn't working. And there's part of me that says that's not, like, there's freedom in that. Like when you have to acknowledge to yourself and to others that I can't do this. And so, but it's a tough one, right? Like, it's a tough one.
Yep.
What do you think? What would you say?
I think you're dead on when it comes to that. At some point, something's going to have to drop. We talk a lot about avoidable pain and unavoidable pain. And Jesus was clear about the unavoidable pain. In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart, I've overcome the world. And he said, I tell you these things so that you may have peace. Like, hey, this is supposed to bring you peace. You're going to have trouble, right? So it's kind of feels a little conflicting at first, but he's warning us that we're going to have, and there is unavoidable pain in life, But so much of the pain that I'm seeing people experience is avoidable pain. And there is a way, as C.S. Lewis kind of talks about this, that pain is this megaphone to rouse a deaf world, right? And sometimes that's what pain does in our lives. It causes us to get shaken up, to go, this isn't working.
Yeah.
And I've got to, and that's what I love about what your book is like. I've got to go back to the way that Jesus invites me to go back to. And that's the simple abiding in him, reorienting some things, letting him rewrite some things in my faulty beliefs, my false thinking, and getting back into that rhythm where, of course, I'm going to experience other pain, right? But now I'm steadfast. I'm immovable. I have an anchor. I have a foundation that he's going to see me through in this. And I'm not going to exacerbate that unavoidable pain with avoidable pain, right? So I think you're right when you say that. Sometimes people just are going to have that humiliation or humility in that situation where God gets their attention.
Yeah. One of the things I learned after writing this book is, like, if I go speak at a pastor's conference or something now, like the pastors that will engage me after I'm done speaking and tell me whatever it is they're going through or challenging is so much more. Like, before, gosh, you probably understand this in deeper ways than I possibly could. But before I shared some of my story and was honest about some of my journey, and before I went through some of my challenges, I'd go speak at something like that, and hopefully they were encouraged or challenged or whatever. But I didn't necessarily get people being vulnerable with me about what they were going through. And now, like, that's a much more common experience for me. Is I hear from a lot more leaders and pastors who say, oh, when I read this or when I heard you talk about this, man, you were describing me. Yeah. And so I think, being in community where you've got some other, people who are, who have been down that path and will be honest about it, I think it helps all of us do the same thing in our own story.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. So with that being said, what would you say to the person who is like, yep, I see them. I see these red light indicators going off in my life. What do I do now, Kyle?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to be honest about them when you see them, but it's also important not to just accept them. Like that you don't have to, spend the next 10 years of your life thinking, man, I feel so discouraged and tired and I'm just frustrated all the time. And, I have so much anxiety around, like, don't do that. Like, don't settle for, that's just the way I'm wired and that's just the way it is. Like, I think, well, let's go back to John 15, where Jesus is talking to his followers. He knows that they're going to be overwhelmed by some of the challenges that lie ahead. He knows what they're going to be dealing with. But what's he say to them in that chapter 14 through 16, his final discourse with them? He says things like, believe in God, believe also in me. I've overcome the world, and put your confidence in me. Like, you're not a victim, and you've not been defeated. It's going to be hard and difficult, but I'm strong. I'm greater is the one that is in you than he who's in the world. And I think having that spirit of victory makes all the difference.
Yeah. That's good.
Excuse me.
That's so good, man. Well, man, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, having this conversation with us. We're going to make sure that we put a link for folks to pick up the book, When Your Way Isn't Working, Finding Purpose and Contentment Through Deep Connection with Jesus. And then we'll also put some links in there. If you're watching this on YouTube, right below the video. If you're listening to this on a podcast, whatever platform, right in the show notes, we'll put other links where you can get connected with Kyle. But man, thanks so much. This is, just such a rich conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, brother. Great to visit with you. Thank you.
Well, once again, that was such a powerful conversation. I just love the stories that we get to bring you each and every week. I'm so honored to steward those. And for someone like Kyle to share so vulnerably about his season when things weren't, quote, working, and how God showed up in that. I hope that that encouraged you. I know a lot of his book is based on John 15:4, abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. And I think it's such a good question, that question of abiding. I mean, essentially what Kyle was talking about is as he began to notice his way wasn't working, it's really because he wasn't abiding, right? He was not abiding in Jesus. And I know all of us get into seasons like that where I don't know, we just kind of stop the rhythms we're supposed to. I think it's really interesting. So often burnout isn't because you're doing too much. It's because you stop doing the things that matter. And one of those things that matters deeply is that abiding in Jesus, inviting the Spirit of God to fill you so that what comes out of you, like I said earlier, before our conversation with Kyle, is from that place of abundance, is from that place of fruit that only Jesus can grow. And I think there's a couple questions. One, how do you know when you're not abiding? How do you know when you're distracted? How do you know when you're kind of off the path you're supposed to be on? And then what do you do about it? I think it is so important for us to be people who are spiritually aware and emotionally aware. And that kind of means checking in with yourself. Like, when was I short with my kids? When was I sharper with them than I actually want to be? When did I, if you have kids, when did I come to them with impatience and a lack of compassion and mercy? And with my spouse, when did I just kind of fly off the handle or like say things to them that just sort of vomited out? And I was like, oh, I wish I could take that back. But you're kind of so mad in the moment, you don't even think about it. When do you find yourself numbing? And numbing can look so many ways. Numbing can look like going on Amazon and spending more money than you should. Numbing can look like binging on Netflix to the point where you're just avoiding your real life. I think even podcasts can be numbing if you're doing it as escapism. Now, shopping on Amazon can be fun and delightful. Spending your days like kind of escaping by watching your favorite show, especially if it's something great on the BBC or PBS or something, is fun and delightful. The problem is when we go too far, and those kind of begin to be the things that we're trying to fill our soul with, rather than with the things of God, rather than with the Spirit of God, rather than with Jesus himself. And then what we know is kind of going back to what I say, that's when we get short. That's when we get exhausted. There is something about exhaustion, fatigue that lets you know, like, man, I'm not taking care of myself physically. I'm not taking care of myself emotionally. I'm not taking care of myself spiritually. Or just like as a sign, like my body needs rest and my body is good and deserving of rest. So I think that impatience, I think that fatigue and exhaustion, sometimes I think it's the opposite. Like for me, I don't know about you listeners, but I can be someone who, instead of getting really tired, I almost get like I'm in overdrive. So I almost don't sleep at night because I'm thinking about all the things that I need to do all the time. And my mind goes and you ruminate. Like, I think that's another sign of not abiding. Like anything that isn't producing the fruit of the Spirit, it's not gentle, right? It's not holy. It's not kindness. It's not compassionate. We know that that's not then good fruit. And so I think the beautiful thing is that our Lord knows this about us. He knows that we're limited. He knows how desperately we need him. That's why he invites us to abide in him, right? And so I think if you think about, I don't know much, I'm not a green thumb kind of person, but the way that trees grow, like if you think of the metaphor Jesus used, it's not like they just grow and grow and grow and grow and never stop growing, right? There's seasons of pruning. There are seasons where some of the branches have to fall off. There's seasons where animals come and pluck things and do things. Then there's seasons of blossoming. There's seasons of offshoots. And all of that, those cycles, those rhythms, is part of how God grows us in our relationship with him. And so when we realize like, oh man, I'm not where I'm supposed to be right now. The stuff that's coming out of me is not Spirit led. Even if it's simply like, maybe you're not even thinking that spiritually deep about it. Maybe if it's just the stuff that's coming out of me is not good. I'm not loving my family well. I'm not loving my coworkers well. Stuff that's coming out is the yucky stuff, the angry stuff, the impatient stuff, the bored stuff, the apathetic stuff. I mean, I think all of that can be signs to go, okay, God, I need to get with you. For some of you, this might be totally new. Like maybe you're not even a Christian or you're brand new to Jesus. For some of you, it means going back to some of the basics that you know help you connect with God. Things like being in his word, things like prayer, things like silence, things like turning on the worship music again, resting, Sabbathing. And I know we all kind of fall prey to like, okay, I'm not doing well, so now I'm going to do well. I'm going to set my alarm at 6 a.m. and I'm going to get up and I'm going to be with Jesus and I'm going to check off the list. And, that almost can become another type of doing. That's different than abiding. Like abiding is simply being with Jesus, wasting time with Jesus. I've heard people say dating Jesus, which might sound funny to some of you. That might sound wonderful to some of you. Hanging out with your best friend, Jesus. Like literally going on a walk if the weather's nice and saying, God, let's do this walk together. And you're listening for the ways that God is speaking. You're looking in nature for the ways that God is showing up. You're maybe even reading God's word. You stop at a park and you read his word and you just spend time with him. God, what does your word say to me? Because God's word is alive. Or maybe you're driving in your car and you turn on a worship song and you just invite your heart, even if it's aspirational, to start worshiping. Even if you're like faking it till you make it, right? You begin those practices. And of course there are some beautiful ancient practices that don't involve striving, but give you some handholds. I think things like something called examine, which is an Ignatian practice where at the end of the day, you just simply look back on your day. Where would I move to consolation? Like I sensed God's presence with me. I felt God's love. I operated from that place. And where did I move to desolation? Where was it my flesh? Where did I not sense God's love? Where was I just kind of ignoring God? And we examine at the end of the day, not to judge ourselves, not to shame ourselves, not to condemn ourselves, but just begin to bring an awareness and attunement to the things of God in our lives and the spaces that God is inviting us into. And I think what we find is that our God is always coming towards us with love, and we are always being invited deeper into his presence. It's just sometimes we have to pause long enough to pay attention. I think often about Moses in the burning bush. Like you might walk by a burning bush and go, oh man, that's crazy. There's a bush on fire. And you'd run and you'd call 911 or you'd go and get a water hose or whatever it is you might do in that fight or flight moment, right? But to pause long enough and realize, oh wait, this bush is burning, but it's not being consumed. That means you've paused to pay attention. That means you've paused to see what God is doing. That means you've paused long enough to go, oh, something noteworthy is happening here. God is here. This is holy ground. I think that's the invitation for all of us in our day-to-day lives, whether you're doing the dishes, you're up in the morning doing your Bible study, or you're going to work, you're in your car, to pause mentally, to pause emotionally, to pause physically and go, God, what are you doing here? I want to hear from you. I want to see you. And our God is so faithful that he meets us in those miraculous, mundane ways too. And I think the reality is just going back to the burning bush. You and I, if Jesus is in our lives, if we are filled with the Holy Spirit, we become burning bushes. Like we become the thing that is on fire, but not consumed, walking through suffering, walking through difficulty, walking through trauma or tragedy or a major life transition, but we're not consumed because the Holy Spirit is in us. And when we abide in Jesus, that fire just gets like greater and greater, and we are not consumed, but we are, as Paul says, we are persecuted, we are pressed but not crushed, right? Persecuted, not abandoned, knocked down, but we are not destroyed. And us being burning bushes, we are invited to abide in the goodness of God, to fill us up, to help us walk through the fire, and just to know him better. I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing. Like, it's not always result oriented. It's simply intimacy with God. It's not outcome. It's communion with Jesus, communion with the Father, communion with the Spirit. And so it's so important to take some time to learn to abide. All right. Let me invite you to a few other things. One more time say go to nothingiswastedbook.com, nothingiswastedbook.com, to find out more about the Nothing is Wasted book that is releasing this summer. We want to have you be a part of our launch team. We want to have you come to our big event. So all the things you need to know about the book are there. Again, I want to invite you to join 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story. It's a live Zoom call. You can find out more at nothingiswasted.com/start here. As always, I want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all of the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We love his music. You can download and stream it wherever it is you do that. Be sure to like and follow us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries, at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. You can rate the podcast on Apple Podcast, and doing that really helps others find these inspiring stories as they walk through their own valleys. You can follow me at ObSamp on Instagram. You can follow Davey at Davey Blackburn. And again, you can follow us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. Be sure to review, like, and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. Again, by doing so, you help others find these incredible stories of pain to purpose. We have another incredible conversation for you next week. So let's go ahead and take a listen to part of that.
I do believe there is a place and a time to share while you're healing bits and pieces of something. Not even something we were going to talk about today, but just like when I experienced my pregnancy losses, like I did share bits and pieces of that, like in the midst of the, as it was happening. But the whole story, it's not till we have the benefit of hindsight and wisdom and maturity and time that we can share, the whole picture. And I love what you talk about on this podcast about that pain to purpose, because when you're in the midst of pain, it can be really difficult to see what is the purpose in this? Like, why am I experiencing this? Whereas now I have the benefit of hindsight. I have the benefit of spiritual maturity, wisdom, time, counseling, time with the Lord, where now I can share, okay, I see the purpose in all of it. I see what God was doing in all of it.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.